52 murders, 10 children, 6 months, April 16, 1996. Easter morning, the small town of Yavoriv, western Ukraine. More than 20 detectives surround an ordinary apartment building on Ivana Kristitelya Street. In their hands, a list of 122 stolen items, evidence from crime scenes scattered across the country. Behind that door lives a man hunted by 2,000 police officers and 3,000 military personnel. A man who single-handedly forced entire villages to barricade their doors and sleep together in groups, too terrified to stay alone in their own homes. When that door opens, no one can imagine the scale of horror they're about to uncover. This 36-year-old man will confess to annihilating 52 people over 6 years. Entire families wiped out in single nights. Parents, children, random witnesses who saw too much, all methodically destroyed. They called him the Terminator, the Beast of Ukraine, Citizen O. But before he became a monster, he was just a 4-year-old boy whose father made a decision that would haunt an entire nation. This is the story of Anatoly Onoprienko, one of Eastern Europe's most brutal serial killers. A story that asks a chilling question: are monsters born, or are they made by a single decision? July 25, 1959. A boy named Anatoly Yurievich Onoprienko was born in the small town of Lasky, Zhytomyr Oblast, Ukraine. He was the younger of 2 sons. His brother Valentin was 13 years older, already a teenager when Anatoly came into the world. Anatoly's father, Yuri Onoprienko, was a decorated World War II veteran, awarded for bravery during the war against Nazi Germany. An ordinary Soviet family in an ordinary Soviet town. Nothing suggested the tragedy that was coming. But when Anatoly was just 4 years old, his mother died. The family fractured, and then his father made a decision that would echo through the decades. Yuri decided to send Anatoly to an orphanage in the village of Privitnoy, Volyn Oblast, a state institution where children without families were raised by the Soviet system. But here's what made this decision devastating. His older brother Valentin stayed home with their father. Imagine being a 4-year-old child. Your mother has just died. You're grieving, confused, looking for safety. And then you're sent away to live with strangers while your brother gets to stay in the only home you've ever known. The message was clear: you're not wanted. Years later, he would speak about this moment with clarity and bitterness. "This predetermined my fate," he told interviewers. He claimed that 70% of children raised in Soviet orphanages end up in prison as adults. According to his own account, it was around the age of 7 in that orphanage that he first began hearing voices in his head, voices telling him about violent things, voices that would never leave him. As he grew into adulthood, Anatoly tried to find his place in the world. He became a sailor, working on ships, traveling across seas. He enrolled in forestry school at university, but nothing stuck. His life had no anchor. He drifted from job to job, place to place. At some point, he was admitted to outpatient treatment at a psychiatric ward in a local hospital. The psychiatrists noted something troubling, but whatever they saw wasn't enough to keep him institutionalized. Between 1989 and 1995, he traveled across Europe, Germany, Austria, working odd jobs as a laborer, living on the margins. But both countries eventually deported him. According to his own later admissions, he made most of his money through robberies and assaults. The voices in his head were getting louder. The anger was building. And in the summer of 1989, at the age of 30, something inside him finally broke. Before he took his first human life, there was the deer. He spoke about this moment years later with an almost nostalgic tone. The first time I killed, I shot a deer in the forest. I was in my 20s, and I remember feeling very upset when I saw it lying there dead. I couldn't explain why I'd done it, and I felt sorry. I never had that feeling again. That was the last time Anatoly Onoprienko felt remorse for taking a life. June 14, 1989. Oleg and Lyudmila, both 31 years old, were standing near their car on a highway somewhere in Ukraine. He approached them with a Winchester rifle. "I just shot them," he later said. "It didn't bring me pleasure, but I felt this urge. From then on, it was almost like some game from outer space." After shooting Oleg, he forced Lyudmila into the forest. She screamed for help. No one came. He buried both bodies in a shallow grave, took their belongings, and burned their car. 2 people gone, and he felt nothing. At a local gym, Anatoly met a man named Sergei Rogozin. They became friends, started breaking into houses together, stealing valuables. But for him, robbery was never the real goal. Over the following months, they targeted several people: Viktor Vasilyuk and his wife Anna, Evgeny Podolyak and his family members. Each time, what started as robbery ended in bloodshed. Each time, the violence escalated. Then came the crime that revealed what he truly was. The 2 men broke into a house in the village of Bratkovichi. They were there to steal, but the family woke up. The homeowners caught them in the act. Most criminals would have run. But Anatoly made a different choice. Eliminate all witnesses. 2 adults, 8 children, 10 people in total, an entire family. They shot them with weapons they claimed to carry for self-defense. After, they calmly collected valuables and left. 10 bodies behind them, 10 lives erased because they happened to be home during a robbery. Shortly after this massacre, the partnership dissolved. Maybe even Rogozin couldn't stomach what they'd done. Operating alone now, he found a family of 5 sleeping in their car on a remote road. A father, mother, 3 children, including an 11-year-old boy. They were probably traveling, stopped for the night. The killer approached the car and shot them all through the windows, one by one. Then came those strange 2 hours. He sat with the bodies, not knowing what to do. He later said he couldn't explain why he waited. Finally, he torched the vehicle and walked into the darkness. During 1989 alone, Anatoly took at least 15 lives. Then he stopped. For almost 6 years, there was silence. But this wasn't rehabilitation. This was hibernation. The beast was sleeping, but it would wake up hungrier than before. For nearly 6 years, he lived a relatively normal life. He worked odd jobs. He traveled. But the voices never stopped. And in October 1995, they became too loud to ignore. Alexander Svetlovsky, 34, was conducting a jewelry transaction with Galina Grishchenko, 38, in a car. The killer approached and demanded money. When Svetlovsky refused, both were shot dead. He stole their car, drove it deep into a forest, and destroyed it with an explosion. Weeks later, 70-year-old Maria Parashchuk caught him stealing food from her apartment. He killed her and set the apartment ablaze to destroy evidence. The beast was fully awake now. December 24th, 1995. Christmas Eve. The Zhytomyr family lived in the village of Garmarnya in central Ukraine. Nikolai Zhytomyr, 27, was a forestry teacher. His wife Yulia was 25. They had 2 young sons. Christmas Eve should have been a night of celebration, of family, of hope. Late that night, he approached the house and began making noise, banging on the exterior, creating a disturbance. This was his method: make enough noise to draw the man of the house outside to investigate. Nikolai Zhytomyr, hearing something wrong, opened his door to check. The killer was waiting with a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun. The forestry teacher died instantly on his own doorstep. Stepping over the body, he entered the house. Yulia was inside with her 2 young sons. She must have heard the shots. She must have known what was coming. Sources say she begged for mercy, pleaded for her children's lives. There was no mercy that night. After the violence ended, he calmly walked through the house, collecting valuables. He removed the wedding rings from Nikolai and Yulia's fingers. He took clothing, jewelry, anything of value. Then he poured accelerant and ignited the house. As flames consumed the Zhytomyr home and the bodies inside, Anatoly walked back into the night. 4 people dead, a family completely erased, and it was only Christmas Eve. More families would die before the new year. January 2nd, 1996. Pyotr and Maria Kryuchkov, ages 27 and 23, were newlyweds setting up their new home in the Lviv region. They were hanging curtains in their windows when he saw them from outside, a young couple full of hope, building their life together. The killer broke in. He shot Pyotr first, then Maria. But Maria's twin sisters, Lesya and Miroslava, were visiting. They heard the gunshots and tried to hide. He hunted through the house and found them both. As he was setting the house ablaze, a neighbor appeared. Mikhail Malinowski saw smoke or heard something wrong. He became a witness. 5 people killed in one house, twin sisters who would be buried together, a young couple whose dreams died with them. January 5th and 6th, the killer changed tactics. Instead of targeting homes, he positioned himself along the Berdyansk-Dniprovska highway, pretending to need help. When drivers stopped to assist what they thought was a stranded motorist, he struck. Sergei Kasai was a naval officer just driving, going about his business. He stopped to help. Savitsky was a taxi driver who thought he had a passenger. Tamara Kochergina was a cook, maybe driving home from work. She saw someone in need and stopped. All 3 died on that highway, people who only stopped because they wanted to help. January 17th, 1996. Bratkovichi, the village where he committed his first family massacre back in 1989. 7 years later, he returned to the same place. The Pilat family lived in a house on the outskirts of the village. Vladimir Pilat, 62, lived there with his wife, children, and grandchildren. 5 people total, including a 6-year-old boy. Late at night, the killer broke in and shot them all. First Vladimir, then the others, one by one. The 6-year-old boy was last. After, he set the house ablaze. But as he was leaving, 2 people saw him. Konzela, a 27-year-old woman who worked for the railroad, happened to be walking nearby. Zakharko, 56, heard the commotion and came to investigate. Both became witnesses. He killed them both outside the house, their bodies left in the street. 7 people dead in Bratkovichi that night. January 30th, Marusina, 28, was a nurse in Fastova, Kiev region. She had 2 young sons. That day, she had a friend visiting, Zagranichny, 32. The killer broke into the home. 4 more victims, a woman who dedicated her life to healing others, gone along with her children. By February 1996, Terror had completely gripped western Ukraine. Families were afraid to sleep in their own homes. But life had to continue. People still went to work, still came home, still tried to maintain normalcy, even as fear surrounded them. February 19th, the Dubchak family lived in Olevsk, Zhytomyr region. Anatoly Dubchak, 32, his wife Yulia, 30, and their 9-year-old daughter. As Anatoly was leaving the house, perhaps going to work, the killer shot him in the doorway. Then he entered and killed Yulia. He found the 9-year-old daughter. She refused to tell him where the family kept their money. This small act of defiance from a child enraged him. 3 more bodies. February 26th, Viktor Gudza, 41 years old, was an ambulance driver. His job was literally to save lives, to race toward emergencies while others ran away. When confronted and asked for money, Gudza refused. His refusal cost him his life. A man who saved lives, destroyed by a man who took them. February 27th, Malina, a small village in Lviv region. The Bodnarchuk family home sat quiet in the evening. A husband, his wife, and their 2 daughters, ages 7 and 8. 2 little girls who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. During the night, he broke in. The parents died first. Then he found the 2 girls. As he was leaving, a neighbor named Salk heard the commotion and approached the house. Maybe he thought there was a fire or an accident. He came to help. 4 more victims, 2 children gone. A helpful neighbor killed for responding to sounds of distress. March 22nd, 1996. Busk, near Bratkovichi. The Novosad family, father, mother, 2 children. 4 people going about their lives, unaware that this would be their last day on earth. The killer had perfected his methodology by now. Break in. Shoot the father first with the shotgun. Hunt down the mother. Find the children. After everyone was gone, he poured accelerant throughout the house and set it ablaze. This was his 52nd and final victim. As flames consumed the Novosad home, he collected his stolen items, including an Akai stereo system, and left. That stereo would later be the key evidence that brought him down. By now, his method had become a dark ritual. He would drive through rural areas, looking for isolated homes on the outskirts of villages, homes far enough from neighbors that screams wouldn't immediately bring help. He would park some distance away and approach on foot in darkness. Then he would create noise, banging on windows, rattling doors, enough commotion to draw the man of the house outside. This was crucial. Take down the strongest defender first. When the man appeared, he would use his sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun. Then he would enter the house and hunt down the woman. He often used knives or hammers rather than wasting ammunition. Children were always last. After everyone was gone, he would methodically search the house. Money, jewelry, stereo equipment, clothing, anything valuable. Then came the fire. Accelerant poured, flames destroying bodies and evidence. Any witness who appeared during or after was immediately killed. He later described his mindset. To me, killing people is like ripping up a blanket. Men, women, old people, children, they're all the same. I never felt sorry for those I killed. No love, no hatred, just blind indifference. I don't see them as individuals, just a mass. By March 1996, Western Ukraine was paralyzed with fear. The media was reporting on the murders, calling the perpetrator the Terminator because of his methodical, machine-like efficiency. In villages like Bratkovichi and Busk, where multiple families had been annihilated, people were terrified to stay in their own homes. A resident of Bratkovice, where 12 people had been murdered, later described the atmosphere. Everyone was afraid. Several families would gather in one house to sleep together, barricading doors, covering windows with plywood. We took turns staying awake to watch. Every sound outside made our hearts stop. Parents kept children home from school. People stopped opening their doors after dark. Some families left their villages entirely, fleeing to cities. The rural areas that had always felt safe now felt like hunting grounds. The killer himself later spoke about the terror he caused with cold satisfaction. People screamed so loud they could be heard in neighboring villages, but no one came to help. Everyone hid like mice. In March 1996, Ukrainian authorities launched the largest criminal manhunt in the nation's history. The scale was unprecedented. 2,000 police detectives were assigned to the case. 3,000 military personnel were mobilized. The Ukrainian government deployed an entire division of the National Guard, complete with armored personnel carriers and heavy weapons, to patrol the villages of Bratkovice and surrounding areas. Army units set up checkpoints on roads. Special forces conducted house-to-house searches. Police established a massive tip line and followed up on thousands of leads. The pressure on law enforcement was intense. The public demanded answers. The media demanded action. Politicians demanded results. But the killer remained elusive. He knew the rural areas intimately. He knew back roads and forest paths. He knew how to avoid checkpoints. And crucially, he knew when to stop and go quiet. Police used territory-blocking tactics, essentially trying to trap him in specific regions. But every time they thought they had narrowed down his location, another crime would occur somewhere else. It seemed he was always one step ahead, always slipping through their nets. The pressure on investigators was immense. They needed a suspect. They needed to show the public they were making progress. And in that pressure, they made a terrible, tragic mistake. In March 1996, investigators from the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, detained a 26-year-old man named Yuri Mozola. They believed he might be connected to some of the incidents. For 3 days, 6 SBU officers and 1 prosecutor's representative tortured Mozola. They burned him, administered electric shocks, beat him. For 72 hours, they tried to force him to confess to crimes he didn't commit. Yuri Mozola, in agony, refused to confess to things he hadn't done. On the 3rd day, he died from the torture, an innocent man destroyed by the very people sworn to protect citizens. The 7 individuals responsible for Mozola's death were later prosecuted and sentenced to prison. But the damage was done. An innocent life was lost. Public trust in the investigation was shaken, and the real killer was still out there. 17 days after Mozola's death, the real perpetrator would be found. In early spring 1996, Anatoly approached his cousin, Petro Onoprienko, who served as a captain in the Ukrainian army. Anatoly asked if he could stay with Petro and his family for a while. Petro agreed. Family is family. But soon, Petro began noticing things that disturbed him. His cousin was behaving strangely. He would leave at odd hours and return with bags of items. He was evasive about where he'd been. And then Petro discovered something that made his blood run cold, a cache of weapons hidden in his house. Not just one gun for protection, a collection, rifles, shotguns, knives, ammunition. It was an arsenal. When Petro confronted his cousin about the weapons, Anatoly's demeanor changed completely. The friendly relative vanished. In his place appeared someone cold, threatening, dangerous. He became enraged. He made threats against Petro and his family. Petro, now genuinely frightened, asked Anatoly to leave. His cousin moved out, relocating to the nearby city of Zhytomyr. He moved in with his girlfriend Anna, a hairdresser, and her 2 children. Anna had no idea what the man she loved was truly capable of. But the threats didn't stop. Anatoly called Petro, continuing to intimidate him. And then came the threat that made Petro act. God will punish you and your family on Easter. Easter was approaching. Petro, an army officer trained to assess threats, knew this wasn't an idle statement. He went to the police. Petro met with Deputy Police Chief Sergei Kryukov and told him about his cousin, the weapons cache, the threats, the strange behavior. When Petro mentioned the weapons, specifically a 12-gauge hunting rifle, something clicked in Kryukov's mind. A 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun had been used in multiple incidents, and a rifle matching that description had been reported stolen from the Zhytomyr area, the same region where Anatoly was now living. Kryukov always carried a list with him. Items reported missing from crime scenes, including their makes and serial numbers. He checked the list. The rifle Petro described matched. This could be the connection they'd been desperately searching for. On April 7, 1996, Kryukov consulted with Police Chief General Bogdan Romaniuk. Kryukov explained the situation. A man with a weapons cache, suspicious behavior, threats against family, living in Zhytomyr with a girlfriend and her children. General Romaniuk made the decision immediately. Form a task force. Search the apartment. Do it on Easter Sunday, when the suspect would likely be home, and the girlfriend would be at church with her children. April 16, 1996. Easter Sunday morning. While Ukrainian families celebrated, more than 20 detectives and patrol officers assembled for a different kind of mission. Kryukov and his team drove to Ivana Kristitelya Street in unmarked cars. They parked blocks away to avoid alerting the suspect. The plan was simple but required precision. Surround the building, block all exits, men positioned to prevent escape through windows. The remaining investigators around the building's perimeter. At that moment, Anna was at church with her 2 children, celebrating Easter. Anatoly Onoprienko was home alone in the apartment. At 12:15 p.m., Kryukov and his officers approached the apartment door. They knocked, firm but not aggressive. Inside, he heard the knock. He thought Anna and the children were returning from church. He opened the door without looking through the peephole. The moment the door opened, officers rushed in. Anatoly, taken completely by surprise, tried to react, but was overwhelmed instantly. Within seconds, handcuffs were locked around his wrists. The beast of Ukraine was in custody. Kryukov and his team began searching the apartment methodically. What they found exceeded their expectations. This wasn't just evidence of a few crimes. This was a museum of tragedy. In the living room sat an Akai stereo system. Kryukov checked the serial number immediately. It matched perfectly. This stereo had been stolen from the Novosad family home in Busk on March 22, 1996, less than a month ago. They found a pistol hidden in the apartment, later linked to a crime in Odessa. They found the 12-gauge shotgun Petro had mentioned, sawed off for easy concealment. As they continued searching, the evidence mounted. Jewelry, wedding rings still bearing the engravings of couples' names, clothing, money, electronics, personal items from dozens of crime scenes. By the time they finished cataloging everything, They had found 122 items directly connected to various unsolved crimes across Ukraine, each piece representing a life taken, a family destroyed. Anna, his girlfriend, was wearing a ring on her finger. When police examined it, they discovered it had been stolen from one of the victims. Anna had been wearing a dead woman's wedding ring, given to her by the man who took that woman's life. She had no idea. When Anna returned home late that Easter evening with her 2 children, expecting to celebrate the holiday, she instead found police swarming her apartment and Anatoly in handcuffs. According to witnesses, she broke down completely. Tears streamed down her face as she repeated, "I had no idea. I thought he was a businessman. He was so loving with my children." The children she mentioned, the 2 kids he lived with and reportedly treated with kindness and affection, had been sleeping in the same apartment as dozens of items stolen from murdered families, including murdered children. Anatoly Onoprienko was taken to police headquarters immediately after his arrest. He was placed in an interrogation room and offered his right to legal counsel. He refused. He said he didn't need a lawyer. When initial interrogators tried to question him, he remained silent. He stared at walls. Then he stated clearly, "I will only speak with a general." Deputy Chief Kryukov had to call in someone special, Bogdan Teslia, a lead investigator for the SBU, known for his ability to build rapport with even the most closed-off suspects. Teslia arrived and began the interrogation at 10 p.m. on Easter Sunday. While the rest of Ukraine was finishing holiday celebrations, Teslia sat across from the suspect in a small room and began what would become one of the most significant interrogations in Ukrainian criminal history. Teslia's approach was patient. He didn't threaten or pressure. He spoke calmly, almost conversationally. He treated the suspect not like a monster, but like a person with a story to tell. And slowly, over hours, Anatoly began to talk. He started with the shotgun. He admitted stealing the 12-gauge weapon found in the apartment. Then he admitted using it back in 1989. Then he mentioned 8 incidents between 1989 and 1995. Teslia listened without judgment, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. The suspect spoke about his friend Sergei Rogozin, his accomplice in the early crimes. He described how they had worked together, robbing houses, eliminating witnesses. But when Teslia asked about the recent incidents, the 1996 spree, he initially denied involvement. He admitted to the old crimes but insisted he had nothing to do with the recent terror. Teslia didn't push. He kept the conversation going, building trust. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. It was now early morning on April 17th. The interrogation had been going for hours, but Teslia could sense his subject was close to breaking completely. And then, finally, the dam burst. Anatoly began confessing to everything, not just the 1996 incidents, but all of them, every family, every witness, every victim, a 6-year spree, 52 victims. He provided details that only the responsible person could know, the layout of houses, where bodies had fallen, what he had stolen from each location, the order in which he had eliminated family members, every horrifying detail. Teslia later said that the suspect spoke about the crimes almost like he was relieved to finally tell someone, like he'd been carrying a heavy weight, and confession was the only way to set it down. When Teslia asked the crucial question, "Why? Why did you do this?" the answer was chilling. "I felt like a robot controlled by a dark force for years. It wasn't me. I was gripped by a higher power." He claimed he had been hearing voices since the age of 7, when he was sent to the orphanage. Voices that commanded him, controlled him, directed him to kill. He described them as telepathic, cosmic, something beyond human understanding. "I'm not a maniac," he insisted. "If I were, I would have jumped on you and killed you right here." No, it's not that simple. These are higher forces. He claimed he had special powers, hypnotic abilities, telepathic control over animals, the ability to stop his own heart through concentration. He insisted he possessed information about global conspiracies that not even the president could access. After a full week of questioning, investigator Teslia concluded that the suspect had acted alone. All rumors of accomplices were unfounded. This was one man, driven by delusions and rage, who had terrorized an entire nation. On April 19, 1996, Anatoly Onoprienko was officially identified to the public as Citizen O, while authorities continued processing the mountain of evidence. Anatoly Onoprienko was arrested in April 1996, but his trial wouldn't begin until November 1998. More than 2.5 years passed. This delay frustrated victims' families and the public, who demanded swift justice. But Ukrainian law created unavoidable obstacles. According to the law, a defendant must personally read all evidence against them before trial can begin. In his case, there were 99 volumes of photographic evidence, crime scene photos, documentation, recovered items. The defendant took his time. He slowly leafed through page after page, examining photographs of his victims, of burned houses, of recovered evidence. Some observers believed he was deliberately stalling. Others thought he was reliving his crimes. There was also a financial problem. Ukrainian law required courts to pay all travel and hotel expenses for witnesses. This case involved 400 witnesses, relatives of victims, police officers, forensic experts. The court simply didn't have the budget. For months, the trial was delayed purely due to lack of funds. Finally, the head judge made a televised appeal to the Ukrainian government. The public outcry was immediate. The government was shamed into allocating the necessary funds. His lawyer, Ruslan Moshkovsky, initially pursued an insanity defense. Given the claims about voices and cosmic forces, it seemed like the logical strategy. A panel of psychiatrists examined the defendant extensively. On November 23, 1998, they announced their conclusion. Anatoly Onoprienko does not suffer from any psychiatric diseases. He is conscious of and in control of the actions he commits. He is fit to stand trial. This ruling devastated the defense. Prosecutor Yuri Ignatenko stated forcefully, "The defendant was deemed fit for trial. His violent nature, not his childhood, was his motive. Many people suffer difficult childhoods. They don't become serial killers." November 1998, the city of Zhytomyr. Judge Dmytro Lipsky presided. The trial of Anatoly Onoprienko finally began. The defendant was brought into the courtroom in an iron cage. The cage was necessary not just for security, but for his own protection. The moment he appeared, the courtroom erupted. Hundreds of people packed the gallery, relatives of victims, journalists, citizens who demanded to witness justice. When they saw him in his cage, they exploded with rage. They spat toward him. They screamed curses. They shouted that he should die slowly and painfully. They chanted for his execution. The anger was volcanic, barely contained. One elderly woman, her voice cutting through the chaos, screamed, "Let us tear him to pieces. He doesn't deserve to be shot. He needs to die slowly, to suffer like our families suffered. Police had to form barriers to prevent the crowd from rushing the cage. For a moment, it seemed the trial might descend into a riot. In stark contrast to the fury surrounding him, the defendant remained eerily calm. He sat in his cage, expressionless, almost bored. He didn't react to the screaming. He didn't flinch when people spat in his direction. When Judge Lipsky asked if he wished to make a statement, he shrugged and quietly replied, "No, nothing." When asked to state his nationality for the record, he answered, "None." Judge Lipsky, confused, said this was impossible. The defendant rolled his eyes. "Well, according to law enforcement, I'm Ukrainian." Throughout the 4-month trial, he showed no emotion. Witnesses testified about finding their loved ones' bodies. Forensic experts described the brutality in clinical detail. Relatives wept openly in the courtroom. He stared at walls. He examined his fingernails. He appeared to be thinking about something else entirely. Sergei Rogozin, now 36 years old, was brought to trial as his accomplice in the 1989 crimes. He proclaimed his innocence, claiming he had been forced to participate. The court didn't believe him. Based on testimony and physical evidence, Rogozin was found guilty. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison. When the sentence was read, Rogozin wept. The primary defendant showed no reaction whatsoever. March 31, 1999. After 4 months of testimony and 3 hours of deliberation, Judge Lipsky called the court to order for the final time. He read through the charges methodically. 52 counts, multiple counts of robbery, arson, weapons possession. For each charge, he detailed the evidence and stated, "Guilty." When he finished, he announced the sentence, "Anatoly Onoprienko, you are hereby sentenced to death by firing squad." The courtroom exploded in applause. Relatives of victims hugged each other, weeping. Some shouted, "Justice!" Others simply collapsed in relief that it was finally over. The convict, in his cage, showed no reaction. When asked if he had anything to say, he stated flatly, "I admit guilt to all 52 counts, including 10 children. I feel no remorse for what I did." But he would never face that firing squad. Ukraine was pursuing membership in the Council of Europe, an organization that required all member states to abolish the death penalty. In 2000, Ukraine introduced a moratorium on executions. His death sentence was automatically commuted to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The man who had told interrogators he wanted to die was instead condemned to spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell. After his trial and sentencing, something unexpected happened. Anatoly Onoprienko began giving interviews. Multiple journalists, both Ukrainian and international, were granted access to speak with him in prison. He seemed to enjoy the attention. He spoke at length about his crimes, his philosophy, his beliefs about higher powers. He gave interviews to newspapers, including London's The Times. He appeared in television documentaries. In these interviews, the prisoner showed no remorse. In fact, he seemed proud. He continued to insist that he possessed special abilities, hypnotic powers, telepathic abilities, information about global conspiracies. In his interview with The Times, he provided perhaps his most chilling description. "To me, it was like hunting people. I would sit around, bored, with nothing to do, and suddenly this idea would get into my head. I'd do everything to throw it out of my head, but I couldn't. It was stronger than me. so I'd get in a car or board a train and go. Despite his lack of remorse, he repeatedly stated that he should have been executed rather than imprisoned. Naturally, I would prefer the death penalty. I have absolutely no interest in relationships with people. I betrayed them. He made increasingly disturbing statements. If I'm ever released, I'll start again. But this time, it will be worse, 10 times worse. The desire is there. These statements ensured that he would never see freedom again. July 2013. 1 month before his death, Anatoly Onoprienko gave his final interview to Ukrainian television channel ICTV to their program Emergency News. This was his first interview in 10 years. The footage shows a 54-year-old man in a black prison shirt sitting in his cell. His face had aged, his hair had grayed, but his eyes remained cold and empty. He repeated the same narratives. The orphanage had predetermined his fate. He believed in communism. Higher forces had controlled him. But he added stranger conspiracies. He claimed that after his first crimes in 1989, he had been interrogated by the CIA and Interpol. He insisted they knew what he was doing, but let him continue. He spoke in cryptic phrases. Maybe someday it will be known, not so that I go free, to live free, but so that this becomes known. When asked what he meant, he just smiled slightly and said nothing more. No one watching that interview knew it would be his last. No one knew that in exactly 1 month, Anatoly Onoprienko would be dead. August 27, 2013. A hot summer day in Ukraine. Inside prison number 8 in Zhytomyr, 54-year-old Anatoly Onoprienko was in his cell, serving the 17th year of his life sentence. At approximately 5:15 p.m., a guard making routine rounds noticed something wrong. The prisoner was lying on his bunk, not moving. The guard called for medical assistance immediately. Prison medical staff arrived within minutes and attempted resuscitation, but it was too late. Anatoly Onoprienko was dead. Igor Andrushko, Assistant Chief of the State Penitentiary Service of Ukraine, made the official announcement. Death was recorded at 5:15 p.m. Preliminary diagnosis is heart attack. The deceased had a history of heart problems, documented in his medical records. He died in his cell, alone, exactly as he'd lived most of his life. No family came to claim his body. No one mourned him. The timing is worth noting. It came exactly 1 month after his final television interview. A 54-year-old man with heart disease died of heart failure in prison. His heart simply stopped working. He had served only 17 years of his life sentence when he died. He could have potentially lived another 20 or 30 years behind bars. His death cheated him of decades of imprisonment. Ironically, he got what he claimed he wanted, just not in the way he wanted it. He had repeatedly said he preferred death to life imprisonment. He had asked to be executed, but he didn't get the death penalty he requested. He didn't face a firing squad. He didn't go out on his own terms. Instead, his heart simply stopped working, and he died in a cell, his body discovered by a prison guard during a routine check. For a man who had controlled the deaths of 52 people, who had decided when and how they would die, his own death was completely beyond his control. There's a certain justice in that. Anatoly Onoprienko remains one of Eastern Europe's most prolific post-Soviet serial killers. 52 confirmed victims over 6 years. Entire families erased from existence in their homes. Of the 52 confirmed victims, 10 were children, the youngest just 6 years old. Entire families were wiped out. The Zhychenkos, the Kryuchkovs, the Pilats, the Novosads, the Bodnarchuks, the Dubchaks, and many more. At least 15 houses were burned to the ground, destroying not just bodies but memories, photographs, family heirlooms. Psychologists and criminologists have studied his case extensively. Some point to his abandonment at age 4 and placement in an orphanage while his brother stayed home. This, they argue, created deep-seated rage against family units. Interestingly, his most brutal spree, the 1996 rampage that claimed 43 lives in just 3 months, occurred while he was living with Anna and her 2 children in what resembled a family structure. He was reportedly kind and loving toward Anna's children, yet during this same period, he was killing other children. Others focus on his claims of hearing voices since age 7. Was he genuinely experiencing command hallucinations, or were the voices a convenient excuse? The psychiatric panel that evaluated him concluded he was legally sane and fit for trial. But sanity in legal terms doesn't mean normal in psychological terms. The villages where he struck never fully recovered. Bratkovici, where he returned twice, still carries the memory of those terrible nights. Some of the houses where incidents occurred were torn down, the land left empty. No one wanted to live in places where entire families had been eliminated. These empty lots stand as memorials to the fallen. The police investigation exposed serious flaws in Ukrainian law enforcement coordination. The fact that one man could operate across multiple regions for years without being connected highlighted how poorly different police departments communicated. Reforms were promised, some were implemented. The torture and death of Yuri Mozola, the innocent man destroyed by investigators desperate for a suspect, led to prosecutions and prison sentences for 7 law enforcement officials. But it also raised uncomfortable questions about police brutality and the pressure to solve high-profile cases at any cost. Anatoly Onoprienko took his secrets to the grave. We'll never fully understand what drove him. Was it truly the abandonment by his father, the orphanage years, voices in his head, or was there something fundamentally missing in his psychology from birth? He claimed he felt like a robot, controlled by higher powers. But robots don't steal wedding rings from victims' fingers and give them to girlfriends. Robots don't methodically collect stereo equipment to sell later. Those are conscious, purposeful actions. The truth probably lies somewhere between his excuses and pure evil. He was a deeply damaged person who made a choice again and again to destroy lives. His childhood was tragic, but many people experience childhood trauma without becoming serial killers. More than the numbers, it's the nature of his crimes that stands out. Entire families annihilated in their homes, children killed last, houses burned to destroy evidence, witnesses eliminated without hesitation. His case changed how Ukrainian police approach serial crime investigations. It highlighted the importance of centralized databases and interregional communication. It showed the dangers of pressure-driven investigations. And it left behind a trail of broken families, empty houses, and unanswered questions. 52 names, 52 lives, 52 stories cut short by one man's rage. The villages remember, the survivors remember, and in the empty lots where houses once stood, where families once lived and laughed and dreamed, the memory of the beast of Ukraine lingers still.